Hey guys, it's Ellie. Welcome back to Bite-Sized Book of Mormon. I'm glad to have you with me. So, if you've never been here before, this is just a podcast where I read through one chapter of the Book of Mormon each episode, and I give a little bit of context, a little bit of insight, a little bit of good times, so stick around. So, if you remember last episode, we read Alma chapter 3, in which the Amlicites, which are the followers of a now dead false prophet, they mark themselves, they join the Lamanites, they mark their foreheads with red, and they take upon themselves the curse that God originally put upon the followers and the family of Laman and Lemuel. And also, at the very end of the chapter, just, as an afterthought, the Nephites completely demolish another Lamanite army that comes to attack them, because, again, they still have God on their side. But their numbers have been affected because there were so many Amlicites that left the Nephites. So, anyways, let's see how Zarahemla continues to move on after yet another false prophet is extricated from their ranks. So yeah, I think without further ado, we read Alma chapter 4. Now it came to pass in the 6th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi, there were no contentions nor wars in the land of Zarahemla. But the people were afflicted, yea, greatly afflicted, for the loss of their brethren, and also for the loss of their flocks and herds, and also for the loss of their fields of grain, which were trodden underfoot and destroyed by the Lamanites. And so great were their afflictions that every soul had cause to mourn, and they believed that it was the judgments of God sent upon them because of their wickedness and their abominations. Therefore they were awakened to a remembrance of their duty. And they began to establish the church more fully, yea, and many were baptized in the waters of Sidon, and were joined to the church of God. Yea, they were baptized by the hand of Alma, who had been consecrated the high priest over the people of the church by the hand of his father, Alma. So I just want to note here, often in the Book of Mormon, when the Nephites kind of get off track, when they start doing wicked things, God kind of chastises them. He gives them obstacles. He puts them in the hands of the Lamanites, which is what usually happens. And I think it's very easy to read that and be like, why is God just attacking and making the lives harder of his people because they're being wicked? How is that helpful? How is that productive? It's just making their lives harder. I mean, that's fair. It doesn't always work what God tries to do to chastise his people, but often it does. Often it does bring his people to repentance. And here is a very clear example of it. The Nephites are mourning the loss of basically the Amlicites leaving Zarahemla because, like I mentioned earlier, that was thousands of people that left the city to go join the Lamanites. Many people probably had friends that left, or family that left. And so people were still dealing with the fact that they just lost so many of their brethren. And this very affliction, it keeps them on track. At the end of verse 3 it says, they were awakened to a remembrance of their duty. And then in verse 4, and they began to establish the church more fully. Yea, and many were baptized. So this affliction that happens because of the wickedness of others forces the believers to more fully remember their quote-unquote duty. And I just think it's lovely. I wrote a note that said the punishments from God really did put them back on the right track. So even though the Zarahemlites weren't necessarily being wicked, they weren't doing human sacrifices or doing murder, the afflictions that God put in their path still served to strengthen their resolve and to increase their faith and their righteousness. And I just think that's a cool example of God's plan working. So yeah, I just think it's kind of interesting to see God's plan in motion. And it came to pass in the 7th year of the reign of the judges, there were about 3,500 souls that united themselves to the church of God and were baptized. And thus ended the 7th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi, and there was continual peace in all that time. And it came to pass in the 8th year of the reign of the judges that the people of the church began to wax proud because of their exceeding riches and their fine silks and their fine twined linen, and because of their many flocks and herds and their gold and their silver and all manner of precious things which they had obtained by their industry. And in all these things they were lifted up in the pride of their eyes, for they began to wear very costly apparel. Now this was the cause of much affliction to Alma, yea, and to many of the people whom Alma had consecrated to be teachers and priests and elders over the church, yea, many of them were sorely grieved for the wickedness which they saw had begun to be among their people. For they saw and beheld with great sorrow that the people of the church began to be lifted up in the pride of their eyes, and to set their hearts upon riches and upon the vain things of the world, that they began to be scornful one towards another, and they began to persecute those that did not believe according to their own will and pleasure. And thus, in this 8th year of the reign of the judges, there began to be great contentions among the people of the church. Yea, there were envyings and strife and malice and persecutions and pride, even to exceed the pride of those who did not belong to the church of God. And thus ended the 8th year of the reign of the judges, and the wickedness of the church was a great stumbling block to those who did not belong to the church, and thus the church began to fail in its progress. So I guess this shows just how fast people can flip-flop from being good to being bad, because it was just in verses 3 and 4 that they were awakened to a remembrance of their duty, and thousands of people got baptized, and now they're being prideful and wicked and scornful, and they're setting their hearts upon things that are not God. And it is pride that is the root of all of their sins. It is so sad to see how quickly it overtakes these people. And what I thought was interesting is in verse 10, it says that the wickedness of the church was a great stumbling block to those who did not belong. So the very wickedness that is happening in the church is causing other people that might otherwise join not want to join, because the people in the church suck. Even if they believe in the doctrine and they agree that, you should be baptized, you should follow God, yes, the people in the church were pushing believers, potential believers, away. And this is sadly a thing that happens today, in the modern day. In fact, in the LDS church itself, there are a lot of people that struggle with religion or with religious trauma just because the people that they saw practicing a religion were doing it in a way that was unhealthy or antagonistic. That is a very sad thing, because in my view, religion is wonderfully merciful and loving and welcoming, and there are a lot of people that don't see it that way, and that is a very sad thing. And it came to pass in the commencement of the 9th year, Alma saw the wickedness of the church, and he saw also that the example of the church began to lead those who were unbelievers on from one piece of iniquity to another, thus bringing on the destruction of the people. Yea, he saw great inequality among the people, some lifting themselves up with their pride, despising others, turning their backs upon the needy and the naked, and those who were hungry, and those who were athirst, and those who were sick and afflicted. Now this was a great cause for lamentations among the people, while others were abasing themselves, succoring those who stood in need of their succor, such as imparting of their substance to the poor and the needy, feeding the hungry, and suffering all manner of afflictions for Christ's sake, who should come according to the spirit of prophecy, looking forward to that day, thus retaining a remission of their sins, being filled with great joy because of the resurrection of the dead, according to the will and power and deliverance of Jesus Christ from the bands of death. And now it came to pass that Alma, having seen the afflictions of the humble followers of God, and the persecutions which were heaped upon them by the remainder of his people, and seeing all their inequality, began to be very sorrowful. Nevertheless, the Spirit of the Lord did not fail him. And he selected a wise man who was among the elders of the church, and gave him power according to the voice of the people, that he might have power to enact laws according to the laws which had been given, and to put them in force according to the wickedness and crimes of the people. Now this man's name was Nephihah, and he was appointed chief judge, and he sat in the judgment seat to judge and to govern the people. Now Alma did not grant unto him the office of being high priest over the church, but he retained the office of high priest unto himself, but he delivered the judgment seat unto Nephihah. So Alma is seeing the iniquity, and more importantly, the inequality among the people, and he's like, okay, I have to do something about this. I can't be effective with helping the people if I'm stuck being the chief judge, and so I have to get away. I have to give it to someone else so I can go help the people among them. And that's what he's gonna go do. But what is really notable for me, as I already kind of mentioned, one of the biggest problems that Alma sees is inequality. People despising other people because of their rank. People being forced to beg, and other people not helping them because they're so prideful in their rich clothing. That is something that is not of God. And so I think it's important to remember that a godly society does not have inequality, which is an interesting thing, because usually in the Book of Mormon, you just hear about wickedness, you just hear about pride. But specifically, Alma mentions inequality, which is interesting because, Jesus Christ himself preached to all types of people in society. He preached to whoever followed him. He preached to those who were hated by the Jews. He preached to those who hated him because they were so high and mighty among the Jews. He preached to everyone. And that is not something that someone does if they think that ranking in society is a good thing. And so, I don't know, just treat everyone the same, I guess. Help those who need it, and get help from those who can help you. That is how it should be. And this he did, that he himself might go forth among his people, or among the people of Nephi, that he might preach the word of God unto them, to stir them up in remembrance of their duty, and that he might pull down by the word of God all the pride and craftiness and all the contentions which were among his people, seeing no way that he might reclaim them, save it were in bearing down and pure testimony against them. And thus, in the commencement of the 9th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi, Alma delivered up the judgment seat to Nephihah, and confined himself wholly to the high priesthood of the holy order of God, to the testimony of the word according to the spirit of revelation and prophecy. So thus begins the most epic string of missionary moments in the whole Book of Mormon. I am so excited. Oh my goodness. Alma's gonna go preach some truth to these people. And I especially like the wording in verse 19 where it says, he bore down against them in pure testimony. Like, that wording is so interesting. He's not chastising them. He's not preaching at them. He's just testifying to them. He's like, this is what I believe is true, and this testimony is pure. And he believes, and I agree with him, that that is enough to change the people for the better. That, just testifying to them, is enough to bring them back to righteousness. And I think that says something about the strength of Alma's testimony. If just bearing his testimony to these people is enough to get them to 180, my goodness. I would love to hear Alma in person. And I will once I die, probably. Who knows? But alas, all we have is the words of Alma in the Book of Mormon. But yeah, this chapter was very interesting. It's basically the lead up for Alma going on his missionary adventures because of the wickedness that he sees among his people. And that wickedness among the people stems from pride and all of their other sins, not giving to the poor, being unequal, all these things stem from that pride. And so I think actually one of the very main things that the Book of Mormon teaches us is that nearly the root of all sins is pride. The downfall of the entire Nephite civilization in the very end of the Book of Mormon is pride, and it's very clearly stated to be pride. And so that is one of the greatest lessons of the Book of Mormon, aside from all of the other ones that we've spoken about already. It's pride. It's to be careful of setting your heart upon things that are not God. To be careful about comparing yourself to others in a, competitive way. So the standout verse for this chapter is going to actually be verse 9, which says, and thus in this 8th year of the reign of the judges there began to be great contentions among the people of the church. Yea, there were envyings and strife and malice and persecutions and pride, even to exceed the pride of those who did not belong to the church of God. So that last sentence is what sticks out to me. Their pride exceeded those that were not in the church of God. And I feel like in the hearts of the people who were in the church at the time that were being prideful, they probably had a thought, oh no, we're in the church, we're humble, we follow God, we can't be more prideful than these sinners. And yet, it was that very thought that compounded their pride. That is a prideful thought that you think that you're above these other people just because, you're part of a church that you don't really honestly practice that well. And so it's just interesting to see that their pride snowballed so quickly, and I think that it was partially because they didn't think they could be worse than the quote-unquote sinners surrounding them. You're not necessarily better than someone just because you're LDS. And I think it's really easy to be arrogant in that way. I am sometimes like that. I think that I'm better than someone just because I believe what I believe. But there's good people everywhere. There's bad people in the church, there's good people outside of the church. And it's important to remember to have that perspective that we are not immune to being more prideful than those who are not in the church, or to those that are not even Christian. I don't know. It's just another thing to be wary of, I guess. Like I said, the whole lesson of this chapter is be careful of pride. So yeah, that is all I have for you today. That was a very good chapter. But yeah, there's just a few links down in the show notes that I want to briefly go over. The first one is just a let me know you learned link, so if you want to shoot me a message of any kind, you can. Secondly, there are some links to get a digital version of the Book of Mormon, so if you want to access it and you can't currently, yes you can. The links are right there. You should go read along, it's amazing. Thirdly, there's a quick support the show link, so if you want to shoot me a few dollars and support what I do as an independent podcaster, then you can. That would be very much appreciated. And finally, we are on YouTube, so if you're coming from YouTube, hello, nice to meet you. I hope you have a delightful day. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, go do that. And then, hello, how you doing? I hope you have a lovely day. Anyways, yeah. So I hope you have a lovely day, all of you, whether or not you're on YouTube or not. Anyways, that was all I have for you today. I'll talk to you later. Bye.